All right, in the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to take a look at the cost of managing SAP changes. As you'll see a little later on, we're going to focus on the people or labor costs, which are associated with an organization's SAP change management processes. There are other costs, as we all know, involved, such as the actual development costs and testing costs, for example, but those costs aren't being considered for this exercise or this webinar and the workbook that we're going to show, just the overhead or management costs associated with managing SAP changes. Then we'll spend some time on a structured way to calculate your cost of SAP change. There are about 24 metrics which you'll need to collect internally to get a full handle on your particular costs. We'll review those metrics in detail today, and we'll share the calculation workbook that we use for everyone that's attending. Since it will take some time to collect those metrics, we have a shortened, simplified version of the cost calculator on our website. We'll take a look at that today as well and show how you can come up with a cost estimate in just a few minutes if you don't want to go through the fuller detail. Then we'll talk a little bit about what to do once you have a cost figure. Basically, one of two choices you have: decide that costs are acceptable and stick with the status quo, or decide that costs are too large and start to look at ways to reduce those costs. At the end, we'll review the chat session and answer any questions that come in. So I forgot to mention, if you do have any questions, please take advantage of the chat in the GoToWebinar interface there. So I forgot to introduce myself. This is Dan McGran. I'm the US Sales Director for RevTrack here. I'm based in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, close to the SAP headquarters. And we know that we have a mix of existing customers and prospects on today's webinar, so I just want to spend a minute or two on a brief introduction of Revelation Software Concepts, specifically to the prospects here and people that aren't familiar with us. So we've been helping to define and shape the SAP change management space for about 20 years now. Our first customer went live with RevTrack in 1999, and we're happy to say they're still a customer today. Along the way, as SAP environments have evolved from small installations with only a few landscapes and systems to really large global installations with sometimes dozens of landscapes and several hundred systems, we've continued to build our software to automate and simplify an organization's SAP change management processes. Our customers have been able to consistently realize significant improvements in 4 key areas over the years. The first area is volume. They're able to deliver more SAP changes to the business users in a given amount of time, frequently with the same amount or fewer resources. A second is velocity. They're able to deliver those changes to the business at a faster pace, which in today's world is, of course, really important. Business wants things faster and faster. It's an agile world where quarterly release cycles no longer work, and you need to deliver things much faster, maybe in monthly or weekly or daily release cycles for some customers. The third is quality. Changes are being delivered are higher quality, less likely to have an adverse effect on the production systems. After all, if you're doing more changes at a faster pace, you need to make sure that the quality is good as well. And the fourth area is reduced cost, effort, and risk. And the cost aspect is really today's topic for the webinar and what we're focusing on. As a company, Revelation Software Concepts is 100% focused on that SAP market space. So all of our resources are committed to improving the SAP change management process for our customers. And our main software solution is called RevTrack. Okay, and you see that up in the upper left there. We'll be at 2 events very soon. First is the Atlassian or Jira event. That's next week already in Las Vegas. And the second is the annual Sapphire event, the week of May 6th in Orlando, Florida. So if you or any of your colleagues are attending, let us know. And if you'd like to set aside some time and meet with us or stop by our booth, pick up one of our platypuses you might have seen at those shows in the past. So I think we all know that managing SAP changes is expensive, but we don't have the figures to show it. In other words, we can't point to specific SAP change cost numbers most of the time. We know that it shouldn't take a few days to get a standard low-risk change moved to production, but it does. We know that the SAP team shouldn't have to spend hours every week preparing change or transport status reports for the change board or CAB meetings, but it does. We know that SAP audits should be a lot easier than they are today. All of these highly manual activities and others which we'll identify, they all add to the cost of managing SAP changes. And really the objective is to change your cost curve from the red to the blue in the chart on the screen, right? You want to bend it downwards instead of accepting the status quo that it has to continue upwards all the time. All organizations are trying to figure out ways to increase their IT innovation budget. I'm sure you've heard that, and shift money from current IT operations to other IT innovation projects. And we feel that there are a lot of hidden costs tied up in SAP change management, which can be saved and really shifted to that project innovation budget. So reducing the cost is one aspect that needs attention, but we know that's difficult with the other pressures we mentioned earlier. Increasing change volume, increasing speed of delivery, increasing quality, all those types of things. The only way to accomplish all of these things at the same time is really with high degrees of automation, which is a key strength of RevTrack. And that's certainly the topic of some of our other webinars, and we're going to stick to the cost side of things today, but you can find lots of information on those other topics on the RevTrack website. So if you want to change the direction of that SAP cost management curve we were just talking about, you need to know where your organization stands today. And I think we've all heard a version of the Peter Drucker quote on the screen here that you can't manage what you don't measure. I've seen other similar versions of the quote attributed to Edwards Deming and others. Or maybe your organization is heavily invested in Six Sigma or Lean initiatives. And I think the Six Sigma philosophy is essentially takes that Drucker quote and really expands on it significantly to support their methodology. Our point is that if you want to reduce your organization's cost of managing SAP change, you need to first understand your current costs. You need to establish that baseline cost, which you measure against. And really, that's what we're going to cover in today's webinar. Again, I want to emphasize what we are measuring and what we're not measuring. Okay, we are not measuring the SAP development costs or SAP configuration or functional costs or testing costs or even application management support costs related to SAP, right? Your organization is going to have those costs regardless of your SAP change management processes, so we don't feel that they should be counted in this exercise. We're also not measuring the cost of SAP production downtime, right? That is, of course, a very important cost factor, but we're assuming that you already have figures on those costs. After all, SAP tends to be the main application with customers that are using SAP, so they would probably have a lot of information around that, those figures. You'll need those costs to get a complete picture of your SAP change management costs, but we're not covering those. We're assuming you have them already. The cost factors we're going to cover are listed here below, about 12 of them, and we'll address each of them in the next few slides. And then you'll see how each of those cost factors are captured in the workbook as I go interactively through the workbook after we get through some of these slides. Okay, so we're just going to step through those 12 cost factors, and approvals are the first one, and they're necessary in an SAP environment to make sure the changes are developed properly and tested and migrated to the correct systems and the correct clients at the right time. The approval process can be simple or complex, depending on your landscape architecture and the governance requirements that you have. We typically see a wide range of approvals at our customers, ranging from about 7 or 8 approvals at a minimum to maybe 15 or so at the high end. And so really this needs to be averaged since all SAP changes are not handled in the same way. For example, security or role changes might have a really streamlined and simple approval process when compared to a finance-related change or a change subject to FDA regulations or other regulations. So not all approval steps are the same. So we normally see customers fit in that 8 to 15 per change approval range. Migrations also need to be calculated as an average. You might have some simple landscapes with just 2 migration steps, for example, dev to quality and then on to production, pretty straightforward. Or you might have 7, 8 or more steps if you have multiple quality systems and clients along the way with an N+1 landscape. A typical average we see at our customers is about 4.5 migrations per change. If you can't take the time to calculate your organization's specific migration average, you can just start at about 4.5 and adjust downward or upward based on feedback from the basis team and other stakeholders. And the third one on the screen, the dedicated SAP change management resources, they're not an average, right? These are the people whose primary job, at least a sizable percentage, is to manage and coordinate or support the SAP change management process. As you'll see during the demo, you don't want to include the basis migration activities in this number, since they're captured in the migration cost calculation above. You would include basis time in this figure if they are involved in the day-to-day processing of SAP changes, right? If they are your people that move the changes. RevTrack customers and others typically have an administrator, so you'd want to include his or her cost, but that is typically just 10 to 15% of their total role, right? That could be attributed to the RevTrack because a lot of it, excuse me, runs itself due to the automation. However, if you're using some other solutions like maybe Solution Manager Charm, normally a Charm administrator is a full-time job, and you would need to include those costs when you're calculating that. And finally, many of our customers and many SAP customers use outside consultants to help move their SAP transports, maybe again using Charm or other methods. So include those as well in this dedicated resource category. Okay, moving on, CAB meetings or change approval board meetings or whatever acronym you might use to capture that, those costs will vary. But as you'll see in the calculations, they're not a huge cost factor. They don't add up to very much unless you have very frequent CAB meetings. For example, we've dealt with some customers that have had twice daily CAB meetings. Then all of a sudden it does become an expensive cost. So being sure to include the CAB preparation meeting costs, but again, be careful not to double count resources. For example, if you have a role of transport coordinator, don't count their time as they're preparing for the CAB meetings, or else you'd be counting their time twice. Okay, so for audits, most of our customers have to deal with SAP audits, of course. Most of our customers have an internal audit team as well as external auditors, right? So the external SAP audit costs, typically, they're very easy to identify, right? So they're just a line item cost figure that you can find out. The internal audit costs will have to be calculated by determining how much of the internal auditor's time is allocated to the SAP specific audit activities, along with any SAP's time, that's consumed during that process, during that audit process. And then as far as cutovers go, many SAP customers have these large weekend project cutovers or go lives so that the cutover doesn't have a big impact or effect on their business operations. These cutovers typically have hundreds of transports, maybe thousands, and sometimes dozens of people involved. And the cost to measure here is the resource cost associated with those weekend cutovers, where teams are involved off and on for many hours over that weekend. And again, you're going to get more of this when we get into the workbook and see how these costs are captured and the particular metrics that you need to keep an eye on and collect. Okay, so if you have an N+1 or N+1 environment, really meaning that you have a production support landscape and a separate project or upgrade landscape, you have costs associated with retrofitting the production support changes to the project systems. If this involves a manual rekeying effort, the costs can be very high to keep the systems in sync with one another. You'll see that the two metrics here are the number of retrofits and the average time to manually process each retrofit. Maybe you don't have an N+1 environment, but you're still going to have to manage the parallel development situations occurring in your flat landscape. By flat landscape, we'd mean something like dev, quality, pre-prod, and prod, or dev, quality 1, quality 2, quality 3, and prod, something like that. In this case, again, you might have multiple quality systems, staging systems, which means you're likely to have multiple changes to the same object or configuration items occurring simultaneously. For example, an object might be in process as part of a project and it's further along, but then an emergency change comes along which needs to change that same object. The risk of overtakes, overwrites, and downgrades in this type of environment is very high. Probably many of you have experienced it. So most customers have manual procedures in place to mitigate those risks. And those procedures, if you're tracking that stuff manually, has a cost. Whereas if you're using an automated solution like RevTrack, it happens for you in the background without any further requirements from your team. So here's a new acronym for you. You can see it on the screen. I don't think you can get through an SAP-related presentation anymore without a new acronym. So it's AHOD. It stands for All Hands on Deck. And that's what we see happens when there's a production down issue, an SAP production down issue. And there's typically, obviously, a significant cost to that. Again, we're not measuring the business cost of that production downtime. We're hoping you have those figures. But this is talking about the resource costs to get the issue fixed as quickly as possible. This normally means a sizable group of senior subject matter experts, SMEs, dropping everything and really working till that issue is fixed, right? Only the time associated with the fixing the production issues caused by SAP changes should be counted here, right? The time of that group. For example, a downtime caused by network outages, since that's not transport related, that shouldn't be counted. Only if you can track the ones that are change and transport related would be counted in this category. The next category, SAP non-production downtime fixes, it's not quite as critical, but still has a cost associated with it. This involves SAP change-related downtime for non-production systems. As an example, let's say your pre-prod system became unavailable because some changes were accidentally migrated. There would be a cost associated with getting the system back to the right state so that you could begin your final mock cutover testing if that was the purpose of the system. Okay, so there we're through 9. We have 3 more to go. The last group of costs is all about fixing development errors earlier in the process. Okay, the common industry cost averages for fixing errors in a quality system is 7 times the cost of fixing them if you would have found it and fixed it in the development system, and 14 times the cost if you fix that error or that issue in the production system. So obviously, the earlier you find a fix and fix those errors, the lower your cost will be. This is the concept or the what everyone means saying shift left, right? Shift your testing, shift your development left. Don't fix things in production. In the last slide, we talked about production downtime, and here we're talking about production errors. So you might be wondering what the difference is, right? A production downtime situation brings production down, and it's not that all hands on deck process I just mentioned to get it back up. For production errors, it means a change or maybe a set of changes, maybe an enhancement. It didn't cause a production outage, but still needs to be fixed. For example, maybe the functionality you delivered to the business didn't meet the requirements and has to be redeveloped, retested, and relaunched to the business. As you can see from that example, this has a lot to do with the user acceptance testing process that you might have in place and how that's managed. So there are definitely some costs there that you need to keep track of, and you're trying to shift everything left to reduce your development and testing costs. Okay, so here's a quick look and a quick preview of the workbook, the change control workbook, cost of change control workbook, I should say, that we're going to review in just a few minutes. And you're going to see more of these in detail. So we capture things like in the different tabs, the people that are involved in the change management process, some of the metrics. This is one look at some of the metrics that we're going to go over in detail. And then over on the right-hand side are some of the calculations that are used to calculate the cost of change. Now, when all of this comes together, here's a quick look at some sample results, which are calculated based on those inputs and formulas in the workbook, which I was just showing and we're going to get into in a moment. This output page really summarizes the various costs here and adds them up. These are the categories we were just going over. And then it divides by the number of, going the wrong way here. Then it divides by the total number of SAP changes that your organization made on an annual basis. And you get this SAP cost per change figure here. That figure shown here in that red oval. So, but that figure again doesn't include any SAP production system downtime due to the SAP transport activity, right? That's added in the section below. In this case, hopefully your organization's cost for that part is 0, but that's typically, unfortunately, not the situation. So the workbook then adds that figure to the above figure, divides by the same number of yearly SAP changes to get an updated cost per change number, which is in the second red circle. Okay, so you have a quick preview of the workbook. Let's switch over to it and take a look at the details and sort of how customers and SAP customers are using this today. Okay, going out to my Google Drive. I don't want that. Okay, so as you can see, it's just a normal Excel type of document here, and we have multiple tabs, which we're going to step through in the next 5 or so minutes. So the first part we start off is who's involved in the process, right? The development team and the functional teams, the testers. Basis, of course, has a big role almost all the time. Change management, release management folks, PMO, audit people, so on and so forth. Your organization will have your own set of people, but this gives you a good start. So Just so look across your organization, be sure to count those that are part of your organization, and of course contractors or outsourced people here as well. So that's where we get started. And then next, we're going to step through this. These are about tab 1 of about the 24 metrics that we're going to collect, and do your best to enter in some figures here so you get the most accurate information available. So these first 3 columns are your SAP transports, and we've divided them into 3 types, okay? Your just normal run-of-the-mill changes, your normal changes, or ways that you might classify them. Ones that are associated with SAP projects. So we do have a differentiation there between normal ones and ones that are associated with your enhancements or projects, because you probably manage those differently than you do your normal changes. And then emergency changes, the ones that are, need to go right away and really need the basis team or the people to devote their attention to get this thing in right away, because it's something that the business needs, or a small fix that needs to be put in, or something like that. So we divide the transports into those 3 categories and do your best to come up with those figures. Next is just those number of yearly SAP projects, and really looking at the projects that are substantial, ones that are requiring those weekend cutovers, where you have teams of people on call. You maybe bring the systems down on a Friday night, you make your changes, and you bring them up on Sunday morning, something like that. That's what we mean by SAP projects here. Here is calculating the number of SAP approvals. This is a calculated field because we're using in our estimated average that we've collected from our customers of 11 approvals per transport. If your environment is higher, adjust it up. If it's lower, you would adjust it down. But you can see that's a calculated field, and you could adjust that here, but we're using that average. And the next one, the yearly number of SAP migrations. This isn't transports. This is going from dev to quality to pre-prod to prod to dev 2 to Q2, and so on and so forth. Whatever your landscape might look like, and even different clients in between there. That's also calculated by taking the number of transports that we added up here and multiplying it by our 4.5 average. Again, adjust up or down as needed for your organization. Next one is one that sometimes no one really wants to admit to, but they happen, is transport-related production issues that were caused. And so we're asking you to get a number for there. And then the same for the non-production. This is if you brought a quality system down, a pre-prod system down, a secondary dev down, or something like that, because there's still a cost associated with those. Here we are talking about retrofits and parallel development. So in this case, can you determine how many retrofits you've done? Manually rekeying of those changes, right? So you enter a number there. And then also a good way to get an idea of your parallel development activity is whether you're managing it via spreadsheets or maybe even some custom programs we've seen SAP customers write. How many object collisions have you found when you're measuring parallel development to try and figure out if things are in sequence or out of sequence? That's a good figure to get to help there. And again, we're just giving you some rough numbers here that you could use and adjust upward or downward if necessary. And then the last 3 in this tab is all about the defects fixed in your different systems. Okay, hopefully you're measuring defects, because most organizations are trying to reduce the number of defects that they're managing, right? Get the development right the first time, shift testing to the left so that the development is better, and you have a dwindling number of defects in production and quality, and you're finding most of them in the development system. But we know it's not a perfect world, so these scenarios exist today. Second tab is really about the time measurement that you're doing. So now you have to get a feel for how long these activities are taking. Okay, for example, the first one here, how long does it take you to do a manual retrofit? Some are easy, some are more complex. Some need someone to take a look at what the person rekeyed in, so that could add to the time. So, anywhere we've heard from about 30 minutes to 2 hours for a really complex retrofit. So come up with some average number. We put in 45 for this example. And then the average number of development or other minutes spent managing parallel development. Again, this comes down to managing those spreadsheets and those types of things, and because that'll calculate at times how many parallel developments you're managing to come up with a cost figure. Here's that all hands on deck number, right? What happens when there's a production down issue? right? Everybody's all of a sudden in a panic mode, justifiably, and you have to get it fixed. So you're getting your top resources, putting them in a room, putting them on a phone call, and moving from, moving it back to where production is no longer down, right? Same thing here, similar but non-production issues. Hopefully that takes a lot less resources, not as critical, but still important. And then talking about the how long does it take you to fix a development error, right? You got it wrong the first time, you have to go in and do it again, okay? So you need a baseline on how long it takes, and then this is times 7, and this is times 14 using those industry averages we talked about. Obviously, it gets a lot more expensive to fix these things if they make it all the way to production. Okay, last couple here. How long does it actually take to do an approval? Look at the email and look at those. I'm going to shut down my Skype because I'm getting Skyped here. Look at the email and go into your ITSM tool or other tool that you're using to do the approvals. How long does that take? And then how long does it take the basis or others to actually do the migration, the manual migration, going into STMS and sort of picking from the list, or maybe you use some type of scripting method. There's still time involved with that. And then you want to look at, this is a big number that you're going to have to get tracking on, is what are your current costs, your people costs associated with those change management resources today, right? In this case, it's like an FTE, 1,800 hours a year is roughly a full-time equivalent. So that's what we plugged in here, that it takes a person to manage this smaller sized environment. And then how long does it take to do your CAB approval meetings? Again, don't double count. How long does it take for SAP audit preparation and execution on a yearly basis? This is the internal. This is the external audit cost, which is just coming from your third-party consulting or auditing company, I should say. And then how this last metric is how long does it take you for an average project cutover, right? All the people that are in that weekend cutover that are on call or on the bridge lines during that weekend, that's the number of hours added up and averaged across your projects. So there are the 24 metrics we talked about. We know it's a bunch. You probably have some of those. You could probably make some educated guesses on some of them, or maybe you're going to have to do some research if you want to get a more accurate figure. This one's not formatting too well. Need to do something here. There we go. So now you're just assigning, you can get this very easily internally. What's the hourly fully burdened rate for those different resources that are involved? Because we use some of these resources factor into the calculations we're going to get into. So you can put an hourly rate for the different types of resources based on what your costs might be. And then you can also do an average, because we use an average sometimes to, because you can't assign these costs to particular people all the time. And now here we are. We're just going through these approval costs, these 12 different cost factors, 12 or 13, I forget what it is, and how we calculate them. All of this information is readily available. You can see where it's coming from. You can adjust them if you need it to. It converts from hours to minutes and those types of things, so you can really understand what's going on here. Okay, so we just go through approval cost, migration cost, change management resource cost. That's an easy one, right? What's that resource cost you on a yearly basis, fully burdened? Also include their backups if they have someone that's a stand-in when they're away from the office. What are the CAB board meeting costs, the audit costs? And going on to the second sheet, the other ones, the cutover costs, retrofit and parallel development costs, production downtime fixed costs, non-production downtime fixed, and then your error costs. And when that all comes together, this is what it looks like. It was the preview that we were talking about before, and it adds up all those costs, divides by the changes, and let's just show you how this is interactive. So let's say instead of 1,800 changes a year, you had 3,000 normal changes a year plus the 800 plus the 400, so you're up to 4,200. Okay, so we make those changes. Some things automatically calculated again. We come back over here, and our number is different. Okay, the total number went down, but the cost per change, the total number went up, but the cost per change went down. Okay, so that's how this is sort of figured out. And that's the top line results here. The bottom line results are here are if you're adding in your production downtime costs, if you had any, and you can identify them, what those costs were, and then you get this revised figure down here, which is what we call the total management cost per SAP change. So that's a quick look at the workbook. I want to try and make my way back here to the presentation because we are about 30 minutes into it and we're planning to wrap up in the next 10 or so minutes. Okay, so we took you through that more complex workbook. We know people don't have a lot of free time on their hands, especially if they're in the SAP teams. So right on our website, I should explode this a little bit, we have a simpler cost calculator, savings calculator and cost calculator. So I'm going to take you there for a moment. There's a screenshot of it, but we can navigate to the website, and I happen to have it up here already. So calculate savings with RevTrack. We just scroll down on the screen, and it's only asking for 3 inputs. Okay, let's use our 3,000. Oh, not monthly. This is monthly now. 3,000 a month would be a busy customer. We have customers that do that, but that's not everyone. So let's do 250 a month, which equates to 3,000 per year. And you can get more information for each of these. And then we ask you to identify 2 other areas. Landscape complexity. What's that mean? You know, how complex is it? Are you DQP and that's it? That's pretty low. Are you somewhere in between with a couple extra quality systems or staging systems? That's fine. Are you a full-blown N+1 or global template? Then you're a high complexity, right? So you have low, medium, and high there. And then what's your governance, compliance, or process complexity like? Again, are you pretty straightforward and you only need a couple approvals and it's not highly tracked, or are you an FDA regulated company or utility company that needs to track absolutely everything that's going on? So you would put those in. So let's just do 250 a month, medium and medium. Okay, this is yearly savings. It's a little bit different than what I had been talking about before. Yearly savings, we're assuming a 50% savings with RevTrack, but really what I wanted to concentrate on here is estimated yearly costs. So we're saying here this is about $600,000. And if we actually look back to our calculation, it's right in that range, right? Although this had more transports. So that will give you a very, very quick way to calculate your estimates, and then you can determine if you want to go a little bit further. I do want to show you one thing here because I find it a little bit difficult sometimes to find that savings calculator. I have to do that. So just go to our search button and type the word calculator. Okay, and then you're going to be brought right to it. That's the easiest way I found to navigate to it. So if you want to take a look at that afterward, that's my recommendation there. Okay, so here we are back over to the presentation. Okay, so what do you do with those cost numbers, right? So, our recommendation is just go to our website and do your quick calculation. It should take you a couple minutes if you have an idea of roughly how many transports you do on a yearly basis, and then put in medium, or adjust them to low and high, and sort of see what you come up with. And you could take a look at that. And then once you have those numbers, determine if you want to take a deeper dive with the workbook that we're going to provide to you after this webinar. Okay, it might take you 1 or 2 weeks most in your spare time, hopefully, to gather some metrics. You can adjust the formulas. I showed you that they are all very open. It's not a locked workbook calculator or anything like that. You can adjust as you see fit. We think this is pretty well, and it's based on our 20 years of experience working with customers, but you might want to make some adjustments. And then once you have that information, we recommend that you present those cost figures to the SAP management team, see what everyone else thinks, right? And then you're at a decision point. You want to determine if actions warranted to reduce those costs and those risks, right? But remember that cost and risk reduction is only one aspect of this. When you go to a highly automated SAP change management solution, such as RevTrack, you're also going to increase your change volume, your change velocity, help you improve your quality, and those types of things as well. So you get the cost savings along with those other business and IT benefits. And then you want to take a look at alternative solutions to reduce those costs, right? RevTrack isn't the only solution in the marketplace. We think we have a very good solution that's been around, and our customers say, we have a very happy and satisfied customer base, but you're going to want to look around, see what's out there. And then once you decide, hopefully, to move on something and automate and simplify your SAP change management processes, assuming that you establish this baseline at the beginning, you want to measure it again in 6 months or 12 months. Go again and interview the people that are involved and see if you've really been able to bend that cost curve down, as we had been talking about before. So just a little bit about RevTrack, because that's pretty much the end of the cost of change stuff. Just wanted to give those that aren't familiar a little introduction on how we go about this. So here's a quick look at and view of our automated and orchestrated SAP DevOps toolchain process. And I just want to quickly explain what's going on in this image. In the middle, you have the RevTrack platform, which is sort of controlling the SAP change process as SAP changes or transports move from that development system to a quality system, and finally onto a production system. Of course, as we're talking, a typical SAP landscape may be more complex than this, and you obviously would have multiple devs, qualities, and prods for your different SAP landscapes. But then you would just have more stops and more systems along the way. At the top, we're showing an automated bidirectional integration with ITSM solutions such as ServiceNow or Cherwell or others. And in that case, they become the single source of audit for IT changes. In those cases, RevTrack has a simple integration with the ITSM solution for control, updates, and audit purposes, right? In other words, SAP changes would start and end in the ITSM tool, but the messy details with all the collisions and overtakes and things like that are handled in RevTrack. The smaller blue arrows that are in between all these other applications, which are connecting RevTrack and third-party solutions for other activities that you may be doing now or may want to incorporate into your process later on, things like business process documentation, code review, impact assessment, different types of testing. And they're just showing these integrations that we have with these other third-party solutions in the SAP ecosystem. And really, by automating the bidirectional communication between these applications, you can realize some fantastic outcomes. Again, reduce costs and effort in managing those changes, speeding up the process while ensuring better quality and governance, shifting the development errors and corrections to the left, as we mentioned a few times already, and really improving system stability, improving your production stability. And a good summary of the way that we see our customers using RevTrack to orchestrate their SAP DevOps toolchain is to say that customers are no longer asking who, as in which person approves the change, but what approves the change, right? Let RevTrack take the results from these or from the code review, for example, and either reject it automatically or approve it automatically based on the results of that automated code review step you might be using. And really the objective here and what our customers are able to accomplish is automating as much of this process as possible and practical. Sort of wrapping up here, when you're going about choosing a solution, again, RevTrack prides ourselves on the outcomes that we're able to consistently deliver to our customers. We're constantly in contact with our customers. We go through this third-party company called Tech Validate, which helps us survey our users, and they validate the results of our survey. And here's just one that we had conducted recently, and I like this one because it shows a lot of the key things that customers are trying, a lot of the key outcomes that they're trying to achieve, reducing their manual SAP change management effort, improve and reduce the time on their audit tasks, reduce the production errors I've been talking about. If they're doing retrofits, we really help them with that, reduce the effort with that, increase that volume and the rate that we had talked about for outcomes, and then just overall get better value out of their SAP applications, which is sort of a side effect of RevTrack. All right, so time check here, 2:40. Okay, we're talking about 30 to 45 minutes, so I think we're right about on time. At this point, it wasn't a technical demonstration. We've been doing a lot of those lately, and we can always do those for you. They typically take about 90 minutes or so is what we ask for after learning a little bit about your SAP environment, so we can customize it a little bit. So obviously there won't be any technical questions on RevTrack, but I'm going to check the chat window to see if there are any in here. And what am I seeing? I always have trouble finding this. One question is, how did we come up with the production downtime figure? Okay, so let me go back to that. And here, again, we just plugged in a number here for illustration purposes. We're assuming that most of our customers would have their teams that would be able to pinpoint how much production downtime, SAP production downtime they had, and how much that cost them in the previous year. So that's something that you're going to have to rely on your own. Let me see. Another one, can we adjust the calculations, or are they fixed? So let me just go back here. And again, all these things are open. If you adjust them and they break, then you're going to have to go back to the saved version, but they're freely adjustable, and you can, let's say you don't want to use the average resource cost for this, you want to use some other figure, or plug in override that with another number that you get from your finance team, higher or lower depending on your situation, and the numbers would be adjusted appropriately. The last one was about a copy of the calculation workbook, and yeah, our marketing team will send out a copy of this workbook as is with all these numbers in it already, again, which you'll be able to adjust if you choose to go through that exercise. So with that, let me just see, where else am I looking? A customer. Can you help them make these calculations for their environment? Yeah, we'd be happy to. Obviously, we know what we're talking about in this workbook, and it would be we'd be happy to assist them. We can all of it can be done remotely, and just with a little bit of input from the customer's SAP team, and we could put something together collaboratively with them. So I think that was the only one in here. Again, I always have trouble with this interface. Yeah, that looks like that was all. Okay, so we're approaching 45 minutes, which is our max time for these things. We don't want to take too much of your time. I want to say thank you again for joining today's webinar. We hope to see you at one of the upcoming SAP events that we're going to be exhibiting at, or please reach out to us, reach out to our website. Here's my contact information on the final page, and hopefully in today's World Wide Web world, you'll have no problem reaching out to us, and hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.